come in right then and there to confirm everything, to check my levels, and it was confirmed. I remember Trey coming home, and I told him, and we're just bawling, and right then and there, just kept praying. And the next thing that brought a lot of fear to us was when she asked me, do you want to do a genetic test? It'll help you find out the gender. That was at 10 weeks. And I said, yeah, let's do it. I didn't know about that. And so she's like, yeah, it's something fairly new. We did it. She called me a couple of days later. She's like, so do you want to know the gender right now? And I was like, no, I'm okay. You can tell us later. I want it to be a surprise. She's like, okay, well, I do have to tell you about the other results. She said, you're positive. You came back as a carrier for cystic fibrosis, which it affects the lungs. It attacks the lungs. And she said, if your husband is also a carrier, your son has a really high chance of being born with that. So right then and there, I hang up the phone and just, fear wants to start taking over. Because I was like, we prayed for this baby, and now there's a high chance that he could be sick. He could be born really sick. But Trey came home, and I explained it to him, and we just started praying. And we're like, you know what? We're going to pray, and we're going to believe that you are not a carrier and that this is not going to affect him. So he went in and did the blood work, and the results came back, and praise God, he wasn't a carrier. So we were happy for those news. But then here comes the time of birth, and my water broke on New Year's Eve. He was already a week late from then. I go in, it's like 3 or 4 in the morning on the 31st. I was in labor for 25 hours.
Wow.
And he was born on New Year's Day. It was pretty scary and traumatic in that moment when everything went down, just because, we're first-time parents. This is our first, time going through anything like that. But with my background, I worked with kids birth through 3 that did have medical conditions that needed, intensive therapy and things like that. So I would see firsthand things that kids would have to, struggle with as babies, the therapies that they would need, things that would happen during birth that would affect them for the rest of their lives. And so he aspirated meconium, which if a lot of you might not know what that means, but basically when he was getting ready to be born, a lot of the substances went into his lungs, and his heart rate was totally normal during the entire process of, those 25 hours, pretty much. Like that, it went from about 120 to 60. So his heart rate was so critically low that they had to rush me to the OR. And I can only imagine Trey, because he had no idea really what was going on. He just knew that they were rushing me out. And in that moment, I could just remember praying, because I knew exactly what had just happened. And I had worked with children that this had happened to them. And I knew what the outcome could be for him. And so I was just praying in that moment, praying. And my entire pregnancy, I remember singing to Lucas, my God is so big, so strong and so mighty. And I would sing it throughout my pregnancy. And I used that to calm me down in that moment, because they're like, they're running, like there's all these nurses around me, my doctor's right there, they're pushing me down to the OR, and they had to put me under because my epidural didn't work, so I could still feel everything. And the last thing I heard was my doctor asked me, did you feel that? And that was the last thing I remember hearing. And so they put me under. I remember waking up in a totally different room, and Trey wasn't next to me. My baby wasn't there. There was a nurse next to me, and I just remember bawling and waking up and asking her, where's my husband? And she said, he's downstairs with your son in the intensive care unit. And I just was like, I need him here. And she's like, we'll go get him. And I just kept praying, and I remember going in and out because, again, the anesthesia, they had to put me under, so I couldn't even breathe at times. Wow. And, I was sitting there praying, and then he came to my side And he had this video of Lucas, and his eyes were wide open, alert, but he was intubated. He had all kinds of wires all over him. And so, when you picture having a baby, you're like, oh, you get to hold your baby. And it was totally different for us, And Trey was like, he's okay. He's stable. He's in the NICU. And so that was in the morning. He was born like at 5 in the morning on the 1st. They cut him out in 7 minutes. So from the time they rushed me out of that room to the OR, within 7 minutes he was out. Wow. Like if my doctor, I know God was with her. I know God had his hands over her, because if she had not acted as fast as she did, he would not, either he wouldn't be here with us today, or he would have had probably a lot more issues and, damage to his brain, to his organs. And so, that was in the morning. By the end of the day, I got to walk down to meet him. And I just remember going up to him and wanting to hold him. And the doctor told me that was there, you can't pick him up. Y'all can't hold him. He's too fragile right now. All you can do is put your hands on him. And I just remember thinking to myself, this is exactly what we need to do right now, is just pray over him and just put our hands on him. Like, that's all we can do. And, it was hard seeing him there, and he would look at us and, respond to our voice and cry, and I couldn't pick him up to comfort him. I could only put my hands on him. And when I was preparing for this, I looked up some verses, and Proverbs 69, no, where is it? I thought I wrote it down, but it basically talks about stretching out your hands and believing and speaking healing. And fear was wanting to take over me in that moment, big time, because I knew what could have happened or what did happen to him. And I remember asking the doctor that came to my bedside, please be honest with me. Is he okay? Is he gonna be okay? And all she told me was, right now, all I can tell you is that he's stable. And so, we went down there, and we didn't get to hold him till he was 3 days old. Wow. And I remember when we went down to meet him on the second day, one of the doctors came up to me, and she told me, at one point, I thought we were going to have to call a priest. She's like, but he's going to drive y'all out of here. Wow. And inside, I was just like, that fear wanted to take over me. Like, my son almost died. Like, what is going to happen with him? Like, is he going to have an okay life, And when she said, he's going to drive you out of here, if you know Lucas now, I laugh about that now because if you know him, it makes me laugh. Yeah. And so we just kept praying over him. Everybody around us, people would call and check in on us, and, they're like, we're praying for y'all, we're praying for y'all. Trey and I would go back up to the hospital room, and we would just pray together. I got discharged, went home without him, and I remember being home, and my dog, we've had a German Shepherd for a long time, and German Shepherds are really anxious dogs, and I remember him walking around the house, whimpering, going up to my stomach and whimpering. And it's like, our baby's not here, And it was tough, coming home and not having him. And that's when me and Trey just I feel like that brought us even closer, because we would just sit there and we would just hold hands, and sometimes we would just cry. We wouldn't even say anything. Wow. But we continued to pray and press on and have that faith, and not just pray, but speak, you are going to heal him. And I know that he's going to come home. Things are going to be okay. And at 4 days old, I finally was able to hold him. He got unhooked from the oxygen. He just continued. And then I remember when they told us, y'all can spend the night with him here in the hospital. Wow. And Trey gave me this little book whenever I found out I was pregnant, and it's about prayers. And on day 7, which was the day that we spent the first night with him, he was completely unhooked off of everything. and it's called The Breath of God. And when I read that, it took a whole new meaning to me, you know, because God breathes life into us. But at that point, it's like my son is breathing on his own.
Wow.
You know, his lungs were scarred. They were bad. They showed us the x-rays. And they're like, we won't know how this will affect him as he gets older. But we know that right now he's doing well and he can go home and he can be with y'all. And yeah, like it was, when we came home, that's when the fear kept wanting to take over. Like, is he breathing? Is he okay? You know, getting up constantly, checking on him. And we continued
Did
to
that
press
just
on.
bring that fear? Did that just bring in more wanting to control things?
And I'll be the first to admit it, you know, like I was worried, you know, what if he gets sick? You know, his lungs aren't 100%. You know, the doctors told us they're not super healthy, but they're not terrible, you know? And yeah, that fear constantly wanted to creep in. Even now, as he's older, he was finally diagnosed with allergies and borderline asthma because of all of that. Mm-hmm. And it's still, you know, I have to remember God has him. He's okay. God's healed him. You know, knowing that what he went through, it's like one of the leading causes for death and severe illness in births. And when I was looking it up, I didn't even know it only happens like in 5 to 10% of births. Wow. And I mean, God helped him beat the odds.
Amen.
You know, and that he every time I look at him and when he's climbing windowsills and acting crazy, I remind myself, you know, he's here. God had his hands on him, on the doctors, on everybody, you know, and it's still scary to think of everything that we went through. And sometimes I still get really emotional, but I laugh at it now, like that statement, because wow, you know, that's all I can say is God worked.
Now, when you're going through all this, you know, you know, you're praying, you're trying to do what you can, read and things like that. Did you have a solid relationship with God? Did you and Trey have a solid relationship with God? Where were you at?
I like to say lukewarm.
Lukewarm.
Because I was baptized in the 11th grade. I made that decision on my own. I never grew up religious. Trey was raised Catholic. He did all his sacraments and everything his whole life. And so when we got married, we decided we wanted to have a relationship with God. We wanted to, you know, get closer and, you know, continue that. And it took us a while to actually start going to church, and before Lucas was born. Mm-hmm. And so, like, we were doing what we could at home. Like, we would pray, we would read our Bible, but nowhere near where we should have been.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And do you feel like, with all of this, do you feel, I know you said it brought y'all closer together. Do you feel that this also opened a door for you guys to really, like, come to God?
Yes, 100%, for sure. Because it was not just, like, what we saw before us of what Lucas was, like, everything that happened, but it's just every day, you know, like, it's a reminder, like, pressing into that faith, and God is for you, you know. Amen. And not just praying and listening to worship songs. It's much more than that. It's a lot deeper, and it 100% brought us closer. And I'm not going to say that everything was perfect after that, you know, that we it's still, I mean, up until we started coming to church here after Eliana was born, it's still, you know, we had a lot of surrendering to do, a lot more.
Wow. You know, this is powerful because we're talking about this faith over fear. And she just said something about even today, sometimes that fear still tries to come. That's why we have to keep on pressing in faith. Yes. All the time. Because fear has a way of checking on you. Mm-hmm. Come back, check on you, come back, check on you. And if you're weak in faith at a certain moment, fear can come back in and try to take that control again, you know. And now, because of time, we're not going to be able to get into it, but just to give people an understanding what we'll talk about, maybe we'll do this next month. But now you've got your first baby. Now things are looking better now. you've got some experience in working with kids and being a parent, this and that, whatever. But you grew up in a very dysfunctional family, correct? Just give us
Correct.
kind of an idea, and then we'll introduce it, and then come back and talk about it, because it's just starting. This journey with Lucas is just getting started, because then you go through some tough stuff, right? Some tough years.
Yeah, for sure. I grew up, my parents separated when I was like 5. I have younger siblings. My mom wasn't living the best life. It was up until recently that she gave her life to the Lord. We were always up and down, you know. I'm a first generation Mexican American. Both my dad and my mom were born in Mexico. Back and forth all the time, and never really had a strong example of not just serving the Lord, but just being a wife, being a mom. You know, a lot of that was never really something that I grew up experiencing. It was always mostly just like, take care of yourself, take care of your sisters, you know. And so that was hard. Also, you know, pressing through all of that and pushing myself to go to school, to finish high school. I was the first one to graduate high school in all of my immediate family. First one to obtain a college degree. And so a lot of that was, I wouldn't say on my own, but getting baptized at the 11th grade made the world of a difference. You know, I don't know where I would be if that wouldn't have happened.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, I met Blanca years ago before she started dating my cousin at a youth conference or youth event or something. I went to go speak. I was a speaker there. And then later on, she met Pastor Carey through that. And Pastor Carey didn't even know who she was or whatever. But and then later on, I found out she was dating my cousin. And I'm like, but what are you doing dating him? You're a believer, man. What's wrong with you? But anyway, that's another story. All right? I stayed out of that. Control. Let go. All right? Anyway.
The retired dirt bike racer.
Yeah, the retired dirt bike racer. It's got a lot of history. What's so crazy is, you know, he and I are cousins, but then she was talking about some things about her dad and where he came from. It just so happened that her grandparents come from the same community that my wife's grandparents come from. And where's that at?
Durango, Mexico.
Durango, Mexico. So
Small world.
we're like cousins, all right? So anyway, but it sounds weird, but it's
Yeah,
not
it
weird.
does.
It doesn't get weird, okay? But anyway, any last things that you want to share concerning some fears that you went through and how you went through faith? Because the story that goes on of her background is pretty deep, and hopefully we'll get into it next time. But anything that reminds you, when we go through series like this, does it remind you of something that's very important that you want to encourage somebody about?
The fear of being a good mom. And I remember having that fear again, like you said, it visits you, you know. When I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, that fear of, am I going to be a good mom to my daughter? I've never really, not that I didn't, but my mom, like I said, wasn't living the best life. We didn't have a relationship. It's only been about 2 years since I've been in contact with her again.
You lost contact with her when you were how old?
17. Full off, no contact at 17.
Wow.
But before that, it was so spotty. Like, I would see her a couple months later.
So you weren't
back
raised
and
by her?
No, not really. And so, that fear, you know, when I found out I was going to have a daughter, that fear wanted to, and I remember crying to my husband and telling Trey, I'm so scared that I cannot be a good mom to my daughter. And I remember praying and saying, God, please, I know you're with me. Please equip me to be a good mom to my kid, not just my son, but my daughter, and lead her to you and have her grow up to love you as well. And so, that fear, it'll find you when you're weak.
You know, Pastor Carey, in doing this series, I never even thought about people having fears of being good fathers or good mothers, that it can consume them. Never thought about that. You know, what a powerful, powerful subject to know. Or even when you mentioned, you know, the fear of maybe not being a good husband. I mean, it's not a fear that sometimes has consumed me, so therefore, I didn't even think about it, but hearing it now, it's powerful. And I'll let you recap some stuff.
No, I just want to, one of the biggest things I take away from your testimony, from you and Trey's testimony, is this, that all of us can learn to apply to our everyday life, is that when they were faced with a situation that really fear could have overtaken them and controlled their lives, I'm a firm believer that first words matter. And if you notice in their story, every time something came against them, the first thing they did was they got together and prayed as a couple. They got together and they prayed as a couple. Wow. Whether it was when they found out they were pregnant, whether it was when they got news, whether it was when they were in the hospital, they got together and they prayed. See, that's so, so important, y'all. First words matter. They really, really do. How you respond immediately, I truly believe matters. You hold on to that promise. That's what I love. Hebrews 10:23, it says, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. Hold fast without wavering. Like, hold fast without wavering. That's one thing I love about this story, is that with all the events, everything, all the news, you remember that song, Whose Report Will You Believe? Mm-hmm. Man, that's old school, right? We shall believe the report of the Lord, right? That's one thing I love about their story, when they were told that we were going to have to get a priest in here, that it's not that fear wasn't trying to get to them, but that they first words mattered. They held on without wavering the promise that God had given them, and they began to pray together. And so, like, there's so much right there. You know what I'm saying? And so I just want to encourage y'all, just from their story, man, first words matter. When you find yourself in a situation where, fear is trying to overtake y'all, or a situation is trying to come against y'all, the first words matter. Yes. Respond in faith. Hold fast without wavering to the promises of God. Okay, it may not make sense right then in the moment. It may look blurry. It may look uncertain, but hold fast without wavering. Hold fast without wavering. You know what I mean?
Hey, as we get back, maybe in November, because we're going to be talking about level up, going from faith to faith. We're going to talk, hopefully, in depth about now your experience with, you have kids, but now chaos is happening with your past, right? And then you fall into a depression. Just so many things happen, and we're going to talk about how God brought you out of that. And so we're going to talk about that, because it's deep. But how many of you are blessed tonight? Amen? So when you see this little boy running around, ain't nothing wrong with him. Number one. Number two, always when you see him, say, that's a miracle right there. That's a miracle. And now you know why they're so grateful and they're so happy.
I just want to say something really quick.
Yes, ma'am.
Before we even knew we were having a boy or a girl, we had picked names. And we love the name Lucas. And Lucas means bringer of light. And his middle name is Daniel. And when I remember bringing him home, all I could think was Daniel in the lion's den. Like, that was meant to destroy him. And it, like, look at him running around. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that and end with that.
I just want to say, too, as a church, let's believe and confess Psalms 91 over Lucas's life and body.
Yes.
If you never read Psalms 91, I encourage you, first of all, to be praying that over yourself, your family members. But let's join together. Just a portion. Verse 6. Do not dread the diseases that stalk in darkness, nor the disaster that strike at midday. Though 1,000 fall at your side, though 10,000 are driving around you, these evils will not touch you. Just open your eyes and see how the wicked are punished. If you make the Lord your refuge, He will make. If you make the Most High your shelter, no evil will conquer you, and no plague will come near your home.
Amen. Praise God. For those of you watching the podcast or listening to the podcast, we're going to keep on going here as a church, but we can't wait to get with you on the following podcast. God bless.